The new Splatfest has been announced, and it's an interesting one. The prompt reads, "What's your go-to greeting? Handshake, fist bump, or hug?" Now this is a great Splatfest topic, because the question's bad, and will therefore lead to controversy. The obvious answer is that all of these greetings are situational. There are times and places where one of them is the correct way to greet someone, and also times and places where that same greeting will be so cringeworthy it's physically painful to watch. In a Western business setting, shaking someone's hand is a skill that people practice. It's so important. Just walking up to your new boss and giving them a big hug is going to feel really uncomfortable in a lot of places. But if you're meeting up with an old friend and you offer a handshake, it had better be some kind of joke or they're going to look at you funny. Different people absolutely will interpret this question as pertaining to different situations. Some people will assume this is what you use with your friends, while others will assume this is the only way you can greet anyone in any situation ever and figure out which ends up being the least bad, whereas others may assume this is how you greet someone you're meeting for the first time, or that it's a matter of which greeting you use the most. And while none of these limitations are really suggested by the question is ambiguous enough that I'd argue they are equally valid interpretations of the same question, all with different correct answers. This makes the task of analyzing the options much more complex, as we have to account for a broad scope of possible conditions. We don't actually have just one question. We have a multi-dimensional combination of sets of assumptions people have about the question. While there are valid arguments for each greeting, there are some greetings that have advantages across a wider span of interpretations of the question, and also advantages in more common interpretations of the question. And it's these metrics we're going to try to use to establish a best option. We'll start by getting into some general traits of the options, and what possibility spaces may exist for their interpretations, and then we'll start putting them up against different interpretations of the question to see how they hold up. One key trait we'll discuss with all of these greetings is the dichotomy of formal and informal, the consideration of whether this is an appropriate greeting for people you're unfamiliar with, or for people you're very close with.
My king.
Stop it. Stop it.
The closer we are to people, the more we let them in, the more vulnerable we make ourselves to them. A greeting, by nature, is a coming together of two individuals, and so it will always produce a sort of closeness. These options all involve physical contact with another person. So, for touch-averse people, it would appear that the only way to win this one is not to play. But even as all these greetings create literal closeness, different greetings suggest different degrees of figurative closeness. And in some cases, the suggestion of that closeness is more of a convention than something that arises from genuine feelings of positive regard. A mix of both formal and informal greetings is important to have, because we have a mix of formal and informal relationships. With the people we work with, our leaders and authority figures, or strangers, we use formal communication to signal a level of respect, that we recognize we're in no position to impose or make demands of them the way we would with our close friends. It's like giving personal space while waiting in line in public. Informal relationships, on the other hand, with family and close friends, are close and interrelated and intertwined, and it's powerful and warm and happy to show that you and another person support each other and want each other to be close. Handshakes are by far the most formal of the options available. As alluded to before, this is the default greeting of the Western business context. While it has in the past played a role in romantic courtship, courtship in general has become less formalized, so it's fallen well out of favor in that context, and it's generally not used among friends anymore either, with a notable exception we'll discuss a little later. The closest it tends to get to being informal is when being introduced to someone you didn't know before. But even that, more and more, is becoming a sign that business is being conducted rather than that a friend is being made. There's a culture to handshakes that a firm handshake denotes confidence, and there's some truth to that. Wimpy, limp fish handshakes that give the other handshaker nothing to work with, none of the physical resistance, the likes of which makes it easier for dancers to communicate their next moves, they're no fun to receive, and they're often associated with people who are nervous to interact with you. What that also does, though, is lead to a certain kind of man absolutely crushing the circulation out of your hand, because what he's interpreted as confidence is subconsciously or even consciously projecting that he's strong enough to beat you in a fight. And so even while this convention is reasonable on its face, it's also led to some tremendously obnoxious behavior. When I say this, I'm looking squarely in the eyes of the U.S. Marine who gave me some academic award in a high school assembly just before graduation. Eyes which were focused about 3 inches above my forehead during said handshake, because I didn't know him and he didn't know anything about me except maybe what the military recruiters were probably targeting me for. The history of my grandfathers both being in the military, maybe my dad's interest in military history, or brief involvement with the ROTC in high school. My being an athlete with decent grades, dude really felt he had a brand to uphold with how hard his grip was, and I have nothing but contempt for that entire sequence of events. Hugs are definitely less formal than handshakes, but they have a surprising amount of range in that respect. A big friendly bear hug is just about inarguably the most intimate of the gestures in question, but there's a variant of hug very common in polite society involving much less physical contact for much less duration, often never extending contact with the other person to anywhere below the shoulders that comes across as much more formal, and can be seen even in formal, high-visibility situations between people who may not even know each other that well. Fist bumps are generally not used in mainstream formal communication, although the perceived formality of the gesture varies widely depending on culture. The most common cited popularizer of the modern fist bump is Fred Carter, a basketball player who famously did so with his NBA teammates in 1970. In some sports, a similar physical gesture arose out of a desire to congratulate or salute someone, as with a high five or handshake, but when the hand was encumbered by equipment like boxing gloves or a baseball glove. But the fist bump also has ties to dapping, which encompasses a range of different greetings which complicates the Splatfest question even further. We'll discuss that briefly so that we can decide how that's going to affect our interpretations of the question. Quick disclaimer. I've done a bit of research on the history here to try and make sure I'm not totally off base, but I'm definitely open to corrections. This history is really a lot more important than the video it's in, and I do take that seriously. Dapping, giving dap, dapping someone up, all describe a variable greeting using the hands that arises out of black culture, originating specifically between black soldiers in the Vietnam War. Some sources say it was used to convey coded messages, others say it was a replacement for the Black Power salute, which was banned by the military, but all of them describe it as a symbol of solidarity between black soldiers. There's a claim that DAP is an acronym, standing for Dignity and Pride. And then there's another claim that it's actually a backronym, an acronym coined after the word already existed. I don't know, man. There's probably someone out there who knows, and academia just hasn't found the right black person to interview about it yet. Now, dapping has certainly become mainstreamed and diluted a lot since its roots in the Black Power movement in the 1960s. Because as soon as something becomes perceived as cool, we spend a decade or two systematically stripping it of what people thought was cool about it in the first place, so that everyone gets to use it and feel cool too. Where it was a symbol of unity and mutual support against oppression in the middle of an unpopular war, as far as a lot of people understand it today, it's a cool way to say hi to someone. Even so, we do still have this vague understanding that it's cool when Chadwick Boseman does it in Black Panther, may he rest in peace, and corny at best when your old white uncle wearing a t-shirt tucked into a pair of old jeans and Nike cross trainers offers it. The fist bump in particular, as opposed to dapping, or even the fist bump's use as part of dapping, has taken on a meaning beyond greeting or expressing unity and solidarity, and is specifically understood to be a celebration of an accomplishment. It's something you do when your buddy gets the phone number of someone cute at the bar, or when you and your teammate make a good play together on a sports team. It's a way that gamers say GG to their opponents at a LAN. It's, to the mainstream sensibility, a high five, but cooler than a high five. It's this interpretation of the gesture that explains its inclusion in Splatoon, a video game that draws heavily on punk aesthetics despite being the product of a massive multinational corporation. I'm picturing someone spraying graffiti on a Nintendo building, and when caught, saying Splatoon inspired them to do it. For legal reasons, this is not a recommendation. Do not actually do this. Fist bumps have also become significantly more popular in recent years as a response to COVID. Handshakes are significantly more likely to transmit diseases between people, and as such, replacements like fist bumps or elbow bumps have become more popular strictly in specific instances, purely for that reason. I haven't seen this phenomenon having the same impact outside those kinds of circumstances, say after lockdowns ended, but it's worth noting the utility in the medical context, as fist bumps are less likely to transmit germs than handshakes, or, to the question, hugs. So fist bumps are more associated with dapping than any of the other greetings for the Splatfest, but the two are definitely distinct in some ways, and the comparison is only further complicated by the fact that handshakes and hugs can also be a part of dapping someone up. Like I've mentioned, some sources say that dapping was itself an entire coded language used by soldiers to communicate, explaining the wide variety in gestures. Speculatively, given that certain references to the Black Power movement were banned by the military, it's probably helped for dapping to be so varied so that no one gesture was easily bannable, and the rules were harder to enforce. In conclusion, it's therefore likely that, for the purposes of the Splatfest, some people will make an association between fist bumps and dapping, and say choose fist bump for that association, while others will consider them to be distinct. One other fact to consider here is that hugs are a lot less of an artificial construct of human communication than the other options. A good hug has been shown to release oxytocin, a hormone that biologically rewards social bonding. It releases when a parent holds an infant, or when a cat curls up in your lap and starts purring, when you hold hands with someone cute or give someone a massage or cuddle. When someone talks about having warm, fuzzy feelings about something, you could pretty accurately boil that down to the release of oxytocin in the bloodstream. That said, even these biological responses to stimuli are subject to social conventions. So I'm no expert on Japanese culture, and the love, money, fame Splatfest taught us that Japan has more of an impact on the Splatfest than NA does. But from my own place in and perspective on the world, we have the following conclusions we could draw. Handshakes are really formal, and video game communities and people spending their leisure time on a video game are generally not going to relate super well to being really formal in that moment. There are contextual advantages to them for sure, but there are fewer and fewer contexts in which they're being used socially over time, and not just because of COVID, and the contexts where they are being used are boring. I'm not saying you're a cop if you pick handshake, because you might also be a fat cat ruthless business person instead. Third place from me. Fist bumps and hugs, I really can't say which I think will be more popular. Fist bumps have this connection to certain cultures and subcultures, certain historical moments, certain specific feelings, that I could totally see any number of different kinds of people favoring or using more often over the other gestures. They're cool, reserved, powerful, confident, while also showing respect and a sense of cooperation with others. Hugs, on the other hand, are just a raw expression of positive regard. There's no other way to look at them than, I like you. It's an unguarded, genuine, uninhibited gesture, to the point that it sometimes may not even be appropriate, but for me personally, I'd rather people err on that side of expressing their positive feelings at the risk of doing so inappropriately, instead of failing to communicate them at all. Hearing someone else tell me that I give good hugs is such a beautiful thing to me, because it's something so simple that I can use to make someone I care about happy. There are a lot of good reasons to pick any of the options for this Splatfest, but for me it was always going to be hugs. Let me know what y'all think in the comments. What made you choose hugs? What made you choose fist bumps? If you chose handshakes, why? And I'll see y'all next week to fight about it.